My name is Adam Dimmitt, and this is my Phase 3 project on how Toyota overcame the Providence Paradox in America. So, a little bit on the background of Toyota. They were founded in 1937 in Japan. They were founded by Sakichi and Kichiro Toyota. That was a father and son duo. So, Kichiro was in charge of designing all the vehicles. So, World War II, the 40s and 50s were a little bit rough on Toyota because they didn't have a lot of money and things were looking a little dire. So luckily for the Korean War, they had a couple thousand vehicles order come in, which gave them some capital to enter the United States in the 50s, specifically 57 with the Toyota Crown. And I'm not really going to go too much into this, but think of the 50s as in America, it was patriotism, big, loud muscle cars, and then you just have foreign cars coming in trying to take some of the shine. So just kind of imagine how that would have went over in America. And finally, for the background, Lexus was introduced right before the 1990s hit, and that is Toyota's luxury brand. So a little bit of a timeline. Toyota's three biggest models were introduced in here. So in the 60s, the Corolla was introduced. In the 80s, the Camry was introduced. And then in 97, that's when the Prius was introduced. And that's a very significant date. I'll go a little bit more in depth later in the presentation. But in 1970, like I mentioned in the previous slide, coming into the United States, expecting to have a good market share in this muscle car environment, they only had a 2% market share, which is okay considering that they've only been in the market for 13 years. 8% of the market share, a little bit less than that, is what they had come 97 when the Prius was released. So just hold these numbers in your head a little bit, and I'll kind of tell you what it's looking like in the 2000s. So here are a few challenges coming into America. There was a sense of pride with American-made products, with American consumers. So um, seeing that Made in America sticker just makes American consumers be like, "Oh, I love my country." It's just this patriotic way that they express themselves. So um, I'll go a little bit more into why that's ironic later in the PowerPoint. International brands were also known as cheaper, smaller, not as good products. They were viewed as inferior to the Fords, the GM, the Chryslers. Um, so this being said, Americans didn't want these little Tokyo mobiles just riding through. I mean, nobody that didn't appeal to people. This was before obviously Toyota kind of diversified what they had here in America. Um, and finally, another factor is environment was not a big factor in buying a vehicle in America because there weren't a lot of regulations set up at this time. So we'll go into that a little bit. So here are a few things as to why Toyota is so successful. So, introducing the first hybrid vehicle in '97, the Toyota Prius, that was the early mover status because they were the very first person in there, so they were pretty much the creator of the hybrid vehicle in the automobile industry. So, having 100% of the market share that year, that is always going to be a good sign. It was just a matter of if they could get consumers to buy their product and stress the importance of the environment. So another way Toyota kind of overcame these stereotypes against them, they created quality vehicles while keeping the price low. So they typically have a model of their car that is less than 20,000 that's affordable, and then they have some that range from 20 to 35, which is pretty on par with other ones. But what they do is they add higher quality parts of the car in different spots that stand out from other cars in that same price range to make them look like they have higher quality. And they have smaller engines, more fuel efficient engines, which helps them last longer too. So this is kind of how they earn their reputation as a reputable company in America, in a place where it's so hard to kind of get past that patriotic, made in America, big trucks, all this, all these American stereotypes. And they did so with effective market research. So it's very hard to go into another country not knowing what that country values. So they came into America. They made trucks. They made SUVs. They made crossovers, sedans, sports cars, coupes. Hybrids, as you know. So they made everything since they've been here, and that speaks to the versatility, which is what gives them, more of that market shares. Because if you can appeal to more than just that hybrid vehicle segment or to that sedan segment with the Corolla and Camry, if you can put in trucks, SUVs, crossovers, just different kind of vehicles, you're going to stand out more. So, and finally, Toyota has cut down their costs by sourcing their vehicles with factories in the United States and Canada. While that's normally not a point to be made with businesses, because most of the time they outsource to China, India, wherever it may be. But going into a market where they have such a large market share, such as the United States or Canada, for example, where they could ship it, those shipping costs, those logistics costs go down. So you're not paying as much in taxes, you're not paying as much in shipping, you're just building a product there and sending it across the country. So it's significantly cheaper. So a few implications of the Prius. In the millennium, the highest market share Toyota has reached prior to 2019 was 14%, which is pretty significant considering that is a foreign brand in America. That is actually the highest market share of all the vehicles in America, all the brands. So they literally, like I mentioned earlier, literally created a hybrid vehicle segment. And if you do that, you're gonna have success as long as you're selling that product. So um, that Prius helped them out so much. And the electric vehicle segment, they have made a modification to every one of their cars. I'll go more into that on the next option or the next slide. My bad. And they also have helped consumers in a way understand how emissions work and how they affect the environment. So, um, not like this portion necessarily is all to do with Toyota, but it does. I'm sure it does tie into it. The CO2 emissions, carbon dioxide emissions have increased or decreased since 2000. So this has more to do with the EPA setting up new standards on how to create cars with less emissions that don't put as much toxins into the air. And in 2001, 4 years after the Prius was introduced, I can't help but believe that this was um, a result of the Prius and the low emissions that they had, to where the EPA, they identified over 20 new toxins that are put into the air that are harmful to life and the earth itself. So Toyota today, in 2019, they only had a 10% market share, and I say only just because they were up at 14%, 14 and then some. However, in this pandemic-riddled year, they are up to 14% in the first half, the first 2 quarters, which does show some positives. And this is the statistic that kind of blew my mind. The Prius models, last time I actually checked before this project, I thought that they were doing pretty well with like 35 to 45 miles per gallon, like city and highway. But no, now what they're doing, they can do 54 miles per gallon in the city and 133 miles per gallon on the interstate. So that's like going from here to Chicago and then some on 1 gallon equivalent of gas. So that's pretty impressive if you ask me. And like I mentioned on the last slide, every model has a hybrid option. So the Camry, the Corolla, they have hybrid options as well. So if you don't want to buy the gas, not like they're gas guzzlers, but if you want to buy something that's more fuel efficient, as opposed to the already 30, 40 mile per gallon gas model, you can get something that's up to 40 and 50, respectively, miles per gallon with the hybrid option. So that just kind of goes to show how Toyota um, implements their strategy of fuel efficient vehicles, and they literally maximize it. So, and another thing, they introduced a hybrid fuel cell vehicle, and this is, I can't help but compare this to the Prius in a way that this is one of the first of its kind, and the only emission that it has is water. So, um, definitely keep an eye on this over the next few years to see if people or other companies start moving toward this instead of gasoline vehicles or instead of those hybrid vehicles. And the impressive thing about this is it wasn't overly expensive. It was only about $30,000 to $32,000 for it, so you're not really breaking the bank for it. It's the same price as a souped-up Corolla. So I think that might be something to watch in the next 5 to 10 years to see if that's if that's the next Prius, so to speak. Um, and finally, this is just more of a fact than anything that I referenced earlier. Toyotas are the ninth most American-made car in America. The only car that's 100% American-made is Tesla, but those also come at a pretty penny. They're about 60 K plus. And the crazy thing about it is Buick's, Lincoln, and Chrysler, all known as American brands, they all are made, like, less percentage of those cars are made in the U.S. than Toyota's. So I think Buick is about 50%, whereas Toyota is about 55%, and Chrysler's only 33%. So maybe if consumers were a little bit more educated and they saw that, they wouldn't go out and buy some of these American-made cars, so to speak. Um, so yeah, definitely watch for Toyota in the next few years on what they're doing with those hydrogen-powered vehicles. And yeah, so this has been an insightful class. I've learned a lot on the Providence Paradox, and how Toyota literally defied expectations and beat these stereotypes. So that's my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it.